So then we're going to I have a bunch of questions. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So
Sure.
let's start by saying, your name and what do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Katie Davis. I'm an associate professor at the University of Washington,
I have some
and a
bunch of questions.
visiting
Okay.
research scientist right now at
All right.
Hasso-Plattner
Let's start
Institute.
by saying, your name and
Oh,
what do you
I'm
do?
hearing feedback from, my name is, do you hear? Is that,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
That's very strange. I'm sorry. Can you say that again? That was very
Sure.
strange.
Yeah, that was
I had
weird.
a
It's like
different
a
window.
little lag.
I should not have done that. Thank you very much. Can you say that again? Okay.
Sure, sure. My name is Katie Davis. I'm an associate professor at the University of Washington in the Information School. I'm the co-director and co-founder of the Digital Youth Lab at the Information School, where we're a group of faculty and PhD students who study new and emerging technologies and their potential to support young people's learning and development, and young people of many different ages. We take a broad look at youth. Right now, I'm a visiting research scientist in the Human Computer Interaction Lab at Hasso-Plattner Institute, although I haven't been there physically for a while because of the pandemic. But that's just to say that my background in training, I started off as an elementary school teacher, and then I got my doctorate at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in human development and education. So my background is very much in social science and human development education. But since coming to the information school, I've been doing a lot of work around design and the design implications of the research that I do around kids and technology.
Well, that's wonderful. So, because I'm going to ask the first question, which I ask everyone I interview, even though they have different backgrounds. The question is, what do you think of education today as we see it? Mainstream education.
American mainstream
American,
American.
yeah, American, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You've been a
Well,
teacher, you've studied education. What do you
yeah.
think?
Well, I guess one, it's such a patchwork, I think, especially in the States with, because there's just such a variety. And unfortunately, there's just too big a discrepancy between the types of innovative things that private schools are doing and affluent suburb schools versus schools that don't have appropriate funding to, have good teacher student ratios and equipment and professional development and all of that sort of thing. So I think the biggest thing that strikes me is just the disparities in American education. And within that, in terms of technology, I see so many really cool, innovative things happening. But unfortunately, it mostly seems to be happening at a large scale and consistently in the affluent schools. So that, yeah, I think that's the main impression that I get.
Well, that's a good assessment. And so I'm going to ask you about your research because I have just been so fascinated by your research on fan fiction writing, on this informal, massive mentorship. My personal view is that action, that's what we need in the future. So tell us about this research, about this fan fiction writing. And then I will just follow up with other questions to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the work that I've done since coming to the information school in some way or other is very influenced by the work that Mimi Ito has done at UC Irvine around interest-driven learning and the connected learning framework that she and her colleagues wrote about and developed. And I think that the fan fiction work really fits in well because fan fiction is a perfect example of very interest-driven learning, very much self-motivated, purely in it because of the love of whatever work that you're expanding on and reimagining. And so, I think that it's very exciting when you see a young person passionate about something. And the fan fiction work that I've done studies deeply a group of youth, and then they grow up into adults, and they are super passionate, and they have found a way to connect with other people around similar interests, and they've leveraged the affordances of network technologies to do that. And so they've not only been able to pursue their interests in depth, they've also been able to build out this social network and been able to really develop themselves as people as a result. And so I think it's a great model. And the one thing though that is noteworthy, I think, is that compared to most youth, we're just talking about a very small fraction. And so what I would love to figure out is, how do we get more young people to tap into maybe interests that they didn't know they had, or discovered new interests? Like, what sorts of supports do we need to give different kinds of young people to be able to have those experiences and scale it a little bit more?
So I'm really curious about this. So let's analyze this a little bit. And since you are the expert, do you think we can run something for math, like a fan fiction? So people just dive into the mathematically fascinated people, just dive in to math work. Do you think something like math or physics can be formed like that?
That is a good question. That reminds me of one of my advisor, Howard Gardner's books. I think it was Truth, Beauty, and, well, maybe, I don't know,
Yeah, I
one
know
of
that
the
book.
books
Yeah, yeah.
where he talks about how you can take, one topic like the Holocaust,
Yes.
and you can study history and math and economics and all of these things. And so I wonder if you could figure out a way to do the same thing and
Hmm.
take some meaningful topic that kids are very excited about. Now, perhaps they're excited about math, or perhaps they're excited about something else that has dimensions that could be mathematically related. Either way, I think that's certainly possible. And actually, right now, I'm doing a study interviewing and tracking a bunch of teens in Seattle and Germany as they cope with through the pandemic. And part of what we're asking them about is their experiences of online learning. And one thing that, there's a lot that they don't like and a lot that isn't working for them. But one thing that seems to be working is for the students who already feel like they're pretty good at a subject and they really like it. They really like being able to just go at their own pace and go off and do their own thing. And so I think there's definitely possibility for something like math. I guess the framing of your question suggests that this might be for students who are already good at and interested in math. The question would then be, what about the students who aren't? Is there a way to, get them excited, or would we want to go find some other interest that they have? Um,
Well, because
but
I raised that question because I'm always curious about, and I completely agree with Howard in that regard, that you actually can learn anything from any subject if you try to branch out, because
yeah,
right now, the math curriculum is predetermined to be certain ways, all those things. So I'm just very curious to say, given the COVID pandemic, could we actually build a lot of those online learning places then to drive students who are interested in certain things into those domains? And with my second question now coming to you, is this peer tutoring, like mentors. So if you have a community like math, but of course you can do multiple different types of math, different projects in those. And looks like in fan fiction writing, most of the helping is really I would like to say unintentional. It just happens. Nobody arranged someone for you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the learning happens on the side. It's because there's this passion driving a need to m- improve in some way or need to know how to do something. And then at that moment, they reach out for help and they get it, the appropriate help at the appropriate time that they need it. And a lot of it is from peers. Well, it's all from peers. So, I think that's very organic and rewarding. And I mean, there are other examples, lots of other examples of that, of youth doing this type of thing online that are not writing related, more mathematical, especially with coding or video editing. I was just talking to a young person a couple days ago who was saying how he has been teaching himself how to edit video. And he was motivated because one of his friends needed a video editing, and then he noticed that some of his other friends already have this skill. And so he then became motivated. And so it's just sort of an organic, meaningful problem for him to tackle, and skills that he valued in part because his friends have those skills. So I think, there's lots of different domains where this peer mentoring and self-driven, interest-driven learning can apply.
So here's another question. But kids go to school. So a lot of times I believe children, there's a number of kids who find schools almost irrelevant and meaningless, not related to their life. Okay. So the kids, but they have to spend time there. How are they managing that? So because you are spotting a different group of children, they got to spend a lot of time on fan fiction to do something, because as you were, I was quite impressed how much they're producing, how much time.
Yeah, it is
How do they
amazing.
manage that?
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes school gets in the way of their fan fiction writing, and that's one thing that I'm noticing in these interviews with teenagers right now, is that all of a sudden they have so much more time to pursue their interests. And before, it wasn't just school that was getting in the way, but just the whole logistics around getting to school and, going to all the classes and then coming back and having all the sports practice and all that. So they have more time on their hands to be able to explore interests, provided they do have interests. That's the thing. Is I think one thing that school could potentially do well, and some schools do well better than others. Unfortunately, not as many as we would like to see, but schools could, I think, help connect, how actually first help young people tap into and discover their interests and what they're good at, and recognize and value things that maybe they didn't even consider were um, you know skills that they had, that come from things that they just do at home in their communities. And then connect those interests to topics that are important to learn in school. So that connection, and then connecting them also to other people who share those interests and opportunities to explore them in different ways. The challenge, though, with that sort of utopian vision is um, it requires a lot of flexibility and one-on-one support. And having been a teacher, now I was a teacher for 1 year in a public school in Massachusetts, and then the rest of the time was in a private school in Bermuda. And in both cases, in the private school, I had more freedom, but still schools are very regimented, the way they're structured in terms of the time for each subject. There's a set amount of time and no more, no less. And there's a set curriculum. There's a bit of flexibility within that. But it really makes it hard. The setup is not conducive for teachers acting as facilitators and mentors and connectors in this way. And so that's a big problem that has to be addressed on lots of different levels, on many different policy levels. And yeah, it really requires a whole rethinking of how school happens and why it's there, and how we recognize learning.
Well, that's what I'm trying to write this book about. Is trying to say, because schools, you have so many things that's so regimented, because you have age-based, you have graduation, you have curriculum, you have everything controlling you. I call them borders. So you live within those borders. Now we want to change. It's not what a teacher can change only. You need everybody to do something about it. So the question, is like, the child you were talking about who is learning to do video editing. And as we are in a very different age. Media, social media is play a very big role, but we teach, let's say, literacy, so heavy in a literacy, but we don't really teach a lot about this other technology, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. And again, there's disparities there because, in a lot of public schools, there's very strict firewalls set in place and limitations to the types of online sites that students can access. And then at home, one thing that I was struck by is this map that Common Sense Media has put together showing what percentage of kids in different states don't have reliable internet access at home, and it is shockingly high. And so if they're not getting it at school and they don't have internet access at home, then again, you get big disparities in who has access to the sites to develop the literacy that's required of those sites. And so, there's lots of specific literacies to develop around using social media platforms. And there's a ton of potential for learning opportunities there that would be very relevant and I think very meaningful for students. But, this right now, first of all, there's a lot of fear of those sites in terms of, what are they doing to the mental health of our young people, which I think are valid questions. And yeah, I think there's just a lot of nervousness around that.
Yeah, I saw
And so
that.
so
I
go
think the
ahead.
Common Sense Media said about children spending, the ones who have access to those things, they're spending, right? I was counting their time, more time on social media or some kind of device or some kind of media than actually they spend time in school. So that's a lot of time. So you are a professor, in the information sciences. So what do you think, like how different, I'm going to kind of push you into something to think about, like social media, like video, all these things. How different is it from simply doing traditional literacy? Is there enough things to learn from that, or can you just other, if you know literacy, then you can transfer back to digital literacy?
Well, I mean, I think they're quite different. If you're thinking about traditional literacy, there's yeah, I would think of that as a very specific set of skills where there's like the mechanical component and then there's the contextual component of, uh, um, the semantics of learning to read. Um, and so I think those are very distinct skills when compared to, understanding different aspects of social media, which can be very complicated. Like you've got the technical dimensions of how do you post something and like what does it mean to like or repost something or reshare something, and then understanding things around issues around privacy and the audience for your message. And and there's a ton of opportunities for learning that I think are quite distinct. However, getting back to literacy, there's definitely, a way of using language on different social media platforms. But there's a huge range, of course, of ways of using language. but those are things that can be explored and analyzed almost like literature, I would think, you know. But yeah, I think of it as definitely a new kind of literacy. So like Henry Jenkins has those different new media literacies, which I don't think I don't think you would ever confuse them with literacy, like the literacy, like learning to read and write. They are really distinct in themselves and require a whole different skill set.
So I have two more questions. So one is that, so can you imagine, because given your expertise in this massive, large information system, can you imagine running a school as many fan fiction clubs, just clubs, just kids come in, then they just dive into different clubs and choose their subject. And is it possible to think like that?
I think it is possible, but I think a lot of things have to change. I mean, one example that comes closest to, well, two examples actually that come closest for me are the School Quest to Learn, which is all organized around different games. Well, I mean, it takes a game structure and it's around different quests. And so it's kind of like deep project learning. I think that's a pretty exciting model. And I think expeditionary learning also, any sort of project-based learning model is getting close to that. But it requires a lot of skill. I think it's much harder to do that as a teacher than to just say, okay, I have a set curriculum. All my students sit in these rows and they're all going to learn this one thing, or even if they don't, at least I've taught it. I've delivered it to them. Whereas, having kids go off and do into different directions takes a lot of management. You have to have a lot of management skill and a lot of confidence, I think, and faith in your ability to let kids go off and do their own thing, and knowledge of how to give them the right amount of support when they need it. I think we would really have to change what teacher education looks like and teacher preparation. And we need to rethink the whole structure of a day. But I know that lots of private schools are thinking in this way. I have been on the board of a private school in Seattle for a few years. And in the last few years, they have really rethought and overhauled what their day looks like so that their students can go deep into some topic. They're rethinking what courses are required. Is algebra really that important these days, or is it more important to learn statistics? They have a whole month where students do something in their communities. That's just, they do every day as they're going out into their communities. So it's possible, but it takes parents who are on board, teachers who are well-trained, and that's very hard in a public school context.
Which school is this, if I may know?
This is called University Prep in
Oh, okay,
Seattle.
I've heard about them. Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah.
It's a fun, it makes me so happy that there's a school like that, and also so sad that it's just not accessible to most students. But it's just such a great example of amazingly well-trained teachers. And also, that's the thing also that I appreciate having been a teacher, is that you really need to treat teaching like a profession, the profession that it is. And that requires respecting teachers in terms of providing them with professional development, providing them with opportunities to advance in their career. So University Prep has many different opportunities for teachers to take on leadership roles. And so it's not just you're either a teacher or the principal. And that really gives teachers a sense that I'm a professional and I'm buying into this and I can experiment and I have, the administration has my back. So all of that is just, really important.
Well, my final question is that you've been studying media, education, being a teacher. You've been interacting with kids, lot of children, different things. Do you think today's youth, especially the ones who is going to coming up, the generation alpha, we call that, the ones who just coming up, do you think they're very different from, let's say, when you were a youth? You don't have to say your age. We just think about, maybe, let's say, how about the kids before the smartphones, basically before the ubiquitous access to the internet? Do you think they are different?
Well, I think the youth that I speak to are different from me and my peers. I don't know. I wouldn't attribute it solely to smartphones, but I do think smartphones and what they provide access to have to play a role. There's so many different ways they're different. Right now, what comes to mind is the kids that I talk to, the teens and emerging adults I talk to, are so much more aware of big issues. And they seem to be more civically aware than I was at that age. I think I was, but then I think, I did have peers who were much more civically aware, but I guess I just was in my own little bubble. But I'm very impressed by how today's youth are just very aware of what's going on in society. And that could be the climate, the race protests right now, the pandemic and its effects, and all these different things. I think, being able to connect with just so many different interests and ideas really allows today's youth to get deeply interested in specific things in a way that would be really hard when I was a kid. To, like, if someone had a passion, they had to really have this passion and go at it, and they had to have resources and all this stuff, whereas more kids can connect to and explore their passions, and I think that's very good. I do worry, and I know that, I very much am aware that the research is not clear on the effect of social media and smartphones and all of that technological ecosystem on different aspects of young people's well-being. And I think it's becoming pretty clear that part of the problem with the research is that too often we look at main effects and these large average indicators, but there are just so many, just talking to youth, that the way they use technology is so specific, and they can use one platform in so many different ways, like within that, like a within person and between person, that it's very tricky to figure out the effects that it's having on youth. And so I think there's a lot of good, and I also think there's a lot of bad. Both of those things are happening, sometimes to the same kid, sometimes to different kids. But we definitely, I don't have a clear picture yet. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity for tech companies and tech designers, tech developers, to really think about how they're designing these different platforms. I know Instagram has been testing out removing the public likes on users' feeds. And I would like to see a lot more of that type of thing, because that's the kind of thing that worries me, like the social comparison and feelings of inadequacy, feelings of missing out, that are just, they're already there in adolescence. That was there when I was a teenager, but it's just so magnified right now with young people.
Well, thank you, Vic. I actually wrote a book on this issue about main effects, and I call that side effects. What works may hurt. I've been analyzing this in education a lot about, when you study main effects for the majority of the people, but you got third people who might have hurt. We study, short-term outcomes, for example, retention of knowledge, it might have hurt your interest in creativity. Sergio was I wrote a book about this 2 years ago. It was kind of fun
Oh,
to play with those ideas. So we
I'll have
talk
to
on
take
main
a look
effect.
at that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's called What Works May Hurt. It's from Teachers College Press. So that was I've been really interested in playing with that idea. But Katie, thank you so much. This is very helpful, and I might come back because your research just fascinating. This is I'm always looking for new ways of say, if we didn't do this, if we did not have school, what would happen? Because I'm also honestly worried about schools in many other countries, like say, where there's no school, where there's no good teacher. So
Yeah.
government said, well, let's prepare better teachers. I said, well, we got millions of kids who are there. You got to do something about it. So that's what, playing with this idea. And also, you look at our inner cities, you go to New York or Los Angeles, you go to Houston. I mean, kids are in horrible conditions. They got to do something about that. So that's what I mean, interested in. Your research is just being very just inspirational. I never thought about that. So this is so cool. But thank
Oh,
you so
thank you.
much.
Well, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, take care.
Okay, thank you. You too. Okay,
Well, bye.
bye.